Thanks very much for being here this morning. I'm Peg Tyre, and I want to talk to you a little bit about a piece I wrote for The Atlantic about writing. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to write this piece. As a longtime journalist, I write about education, and I'm in a lot of public school classrooms. And what I see is that when it comes to English language arts, children from low-income families do not achieve at the same rates as their more affluent counterparts. We call this the achievement gap. We know that poor kids come into schools speaking fewer words and having fewer pre-literacy type experiences. Teachers teach them to read, and in the very early years, poor kids do well. They progress like middle-class kids. And then comes fourth grade, and their progress seems to flatline. And middle-class kids at that time go from learning to read to reading to learn. So they go from being able to sound out words to be able to read informative paragraphs in their textbooks about, say, the Everglades. And then they read those paragraphs and they know something about those swamps in Florida. And poor kids are not making that transition as effectively. They're learning to read, but they're not learning to extract meaning from words like middle-class kids. Their comprehension does not keep pace, and they fall further and further behind. So the question that I grapple with as a journalist and as a thinker about education, and I know the question that you grapple with, is what creates the achievement gap, and what can we do about it? Why does this happen? What do affluent and middle-class kids have that poor kids don't have? So I pursued this question for a long time, for many years, and I read a lot of research, and I talked to a lot of neuroscientists who are working on cognition, and the more I looked at studies about literacy, the more upset I got, because I came to see that there's a big problem in American schools, and I came to believe that there's been a big misunderstanding about what it means to be literate. So somewhere along the line, we got the idea that being literate meant teaching kids to read. That was the same as making them literate. But that's not what the research says. What the research says is that reading, writing, listening, and speaking all work together. They're sort of four strands of the same rope. And that being able to speak properly, read complex texts, and reflect complex thinking in writing actually makes you smarter. It makes you able to read something and construct your own knowledge, which is, however you do it, the ultimate goal of education, to get students to construct their own knowledge. But poor kids aren't getting to do that. They aren't getting the skills they need at home, and when they get to school, they're being taught to read, but listening, speaking, writing, forget it. It's not happening. So what happens is when you go into low-income high schools, you often meet children who don't read particularly well. They can decode but can't comprehend very well. They don't speak well, and they don't write well. So as a journalist, I was looking to tell the story and to lob into the national dialogue the concept that we will not close the achievement gap until we close the literacy gap. And I set out to find a way to write about this kind of abstract idea, how to write about the ways in which writing and speaking, and reading, of course, deepens thinking. So I found my vehicle in a school in Staten Island called New Dorp that was in the midst of a dramatic transformation. The principal of New Dorp is here today, Deirdre DeAngelis, and she led this dramatic transformation. What she realized is that they needed to formalize listening and speaking as exercises in all subjects. And they imported a program of explicit writing instruction perfected by a woman named Dr. Judith Hochman. As you will see from Tony Ann when she speaks about the program, it was game-changing for these students. I saw before me, in flesh and blood, exactly what neuroscientists and researchers said I would see, that instructed in the right ways, low-income students were able to think in complex ways, read complex texts, and able to express that thinking in their speech and in their writing. They closed the achievement gap by closing the literacy gap. So as I said, I'm pleased to tell you that you'll have the opportunity to find out what actually went on at New Dorp. And I want to introduce now Tony Ann Vroom, who's here today to describe the way that this highly explicit, carefully calibrated, artfully sequenced writing instruction advanced the thinking of their students. So, Tony Ann?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Peg. So I'm so excited to be all the way here in Texas from little Staten Island. Right now I'd be teaching my global history class. Hopefully, you know, my kids are doing okay with the sub. So here we go. So as Peg said, NUDOP was in trouble. And as you see here, we have a little PowerPoint on that side. These are some of the reasons why. The vast majority of our kids come to us below grade level. In terms of their statewide assessments, which we have the Regents exams that they have to take to graduate, the kids would open up that test booklet, attempt the multiple choice, get to the writing portion, and just shut that book because they didn't know how to do it. All of these things contributing to a very low graduation rate. So like Peg said, Ms. DeAngelis led this reform movement where we looked at, and this went on for years, teams of teachers looking at what exactly are our students' skill deficits and how are we not meeting those needs. And after years and years and years of looking at patterns, we found that our students struggle in writing. And that's not really a big surprise. And I'll put myself out there as a teacher. I always assigned writing. I'm a social studies teacher. My kids would have essays on tests. But I never taught writing. And I really never knew how to teach writing. So it's at that point that Ms. DeAngelis sent about how many? 50 of us out of the building on the same exact day to attend Dr. Judith Hochman's writing training, and it changed my life. And more importantly, it changed the life of our kids. And I'd like to walk you through one of our kids just so you could see how dramatic this change is. So here's Danny. Hi, Danny. This is Danny in the 9th grade. And what you see here on this slide, this is the very first writing sample that we received from Danny. This was in his social studies class. He was given a very general prompt, why do we study the past? And as you could see here, it's a mess. And you look at this as the teacher and you say, how do I get Danny college and career ready with this? What do I do? I really didn't know what, but Dr. Judith Hochman's program gave me the tools to teach Danny how to get there. He wasn't ready at this point, but Danny is ready now, and this is why. Among our programs, some of the components that made us successful, accountable talking, the sentence strategies. This program is all about teaching students how to express themselves effectively, whether it's in their speech or in their writing. So in our program, we focus on the sentence. To us, the sentence is so powerful. We firmly believe in the idea that great writers are the masters of the sentence. So we explicitly teach kids how to write a good sentence. And we continue this work throughout. As the program progresses, we move to paragraph and essay writing, but we always keep in mind the power of that sentence. And I think you'll see that when you get to Danny's work. So when we say accountable talking, what do we mean by that? We want kids listening to one another as they speak. We want them adding on each other's ideas. We want them debating, but in a very respectful manner. And most of the students coming into NUDOP did not enter our school from linguistically rich backgrounds. So if we expect our students to speak in such a way, we have to show them how. So what you see here is a poster that we have blown up in all of the classrooms. Some of the teachers have shrunk it down and laminated it onto desks. And kids come in the 9th grade, and as they're responding to a question, teachers say, use one of these prompts. At first, the kids might laugh. They think it sounds a little funny. But as time goes on, they start to use these in their speech. And you could only imagine the level of discussion and debate that comes up as kids learn to speak in this manner. It's absolutely incredible. The sentence strategies. So in our writing program, the sentence is the foundation. And I wish I had the time to show you all of these strategies because they're so powerful and each one does so much, but I have very limited time, so I only get to show you one. And the one I'm going to show you is because, but, and so. If you remember from that pre-assessment, most of our students come to us writing in fragments. They write in simple sentences, grammatically incorrect sentences. So we need to explicitly teach them how to write a complex sentence, and that's what conjunctions do. I made an assumption as a teacher, and this is now 11 years teaching social studies, that I knew my kids struggled with writing, but I assumed they could at least use these words correctly in a sentence. And it turns out they couldn't. And we have all this pressure now with writing these argumentative essays where students need to navigate between counterclaims and claims. I don't understand how they're doing that if they don't know how to use the word but correctly in a sentence. We had to show them how. And this is how we did it. So what you see here is an example of one of these writing strategies. So say Danny is sitting in his 9th grade ELA class, they're reading Of Mice and Men, and the teacher gives them this sentence prompt. Lenny likes to pet small animals, and they expect the student to be able to complete the sentence 3 different ways, using because, but, and so. When people from the outside look at these strategies, they say, high school, 9th grade, they're writing sentences, this looks really babyish. This looks very simple. But if you really look deeply at it, it's doing so much. These are deceptively simple because they're backfilling all of the skills that our students desperately, desperately needed. If we just take the because, for example, Danny, as he's doing that activity, really needs to think about why Lenny does the things that he does. Why does he act that way? This is going to force Danny to go back into the text to find some piece of evidence to be able to explain this. So we're not just teaching writing skills, we're also teaching critical thinking, which is huge, and that's what this is all about. So here's Danny's actual work. This is in social studies. He was asked to write about Hammurabi. As the content teacher, this is great. This is a huge assessment. I could really tell that Danny understood Hammurabi because he could explain Hammurabi in his code 3 different ways. In the past, as a social studies teacher, what were the activities that I would give my kids as an assessment at the end of a lesson? Imagine you were living in Hammurabi society. How would you feel? Write a postcard to a friend talking about living in Babylon. What was that really doing for that kid? This is giving this kid far more in something as simple as a sentence strategy. And you'll see when we get to his paragraph work how much he's grown because of this. Okay, as we go through the program and the students develop their sentences, we eventually move to the paragraph. In our building, there is no such thing as free writing. A kid never just sits down and we say to them, just write a paragraph or just write an essay. Because we found after years and years of looking at student work that they struggle with the organization of their ideas. How do you organize your ideas? Through an outline. And there are a lot of outlines out there. Teachers use graphic organizers. I've done them too. The Venn diagram, the web, the bubbles, the flow chart, which are all great in teaching concepts, but they do not transfer well when writing a paragraph and essay, because we don't think in bubbles. This outline mimics the way that we think in a linear fashion. The student can envision a beginning, a middle, and an end. And as you look at his outlines, he develops a topic sentence. We have a very specific system of note-taking. So if you look at his details, you'll notice the use of certain symbols, the equal sign, the plus, the arrow. All of those symbols represent the relationship between ideas. So when Danny uses an arrow, he's trying to communicate led to or resulted in. He's showing cause and effect, something that Danny did not do when he came to us in September. From this outline, now you can see Danny's paragraph. So keep in mind that pre-assessment, that disaster that you saw in the beginning. Let's just look at his topic sentence. So this is about the Aztecs, and Danny writes, the Aztecs, a complex civilization, developed in Mesoamerica. That, a complex civilization, isn't positive. Danny did not come to New Dorp High School writing in a positives. And Danny did not just discover what an appositive is. We explicitly taught him how to do that. And as you go through his paragraph, you're going to start to see the development of his sentence level skills. He starts to use words like although. We teach them a great way to start a sentence is by using a subordinating conjunction. Although, it's also going to show change of direction. He uses in particular to back up one of his ideas, and he's going to give you specific examples to back up his statements. He uses however, once again showing change of direction. He adds an additional appositive. This one sentence to me is huge because it shows all of the little mini activities we did to get him here. However, Hernan Cortez, a Spanish conquistador, there's his appositive, led a group of outside armies to take over their land, which led to, so you see how that note-taking will start to translate to their sentence skills, which led to the destruction of the Aztec Empire. And he ends with a concluding statement. Again, these are things that Danny did not discover how to do, but he always had the potential to do it. A lot of times people look at our high school kids and they look at them when they come in and they say, if they can't do it by the time they get to high school, it's impossible. It's a lost cause. And it's not impossible. They have the ideas in their head. They just need to be unlocked, and they just need to be scaffolded, and that's what this writing is going to do for him. As we move along, so this would be about spring of Danny's 9th grade. Now we get to June. By June, Danny is able to create an outline to write an essay. And if you look at this outline, there are a lot of things happening here. He develops a thesis statement. He writes an introduction and a conclusion. He develops categories to support his thesis. He uses details and evidence. And this is an argumentative essay. So if I looked at Danny in September and I thought, can this student write this argumentative essay? I probably wouldn't think he could. But because we scaffolded these skills, we got him there. And when you see his final product, the change is dramatic. So obviously, we can't read all of this, but I want to just pinpoint certain things. In his introduction, he develops a complex thesis statement. While some view the conquest of the Americas as a positive event, without question, it had a negative impact. Before this program, if we asked our kids to write a thesis statement, what is it usually? In this essay, I'm going to tell you about blank, or I believe blank. Now Danny is writing a thesis where he's acknowledging a counterclaim, but he's emphasizing his point, and it's very organized, and it's thoughtful. And as we go through, you'll see on just what we consider to be our little mini victories, the use of transitions. First, in addition, as we go through, he develops a concluding statement to, one, ends the paragraph, but link that section to what he's about to argue, what his claim is. And he's not just going to state a claim, he's going to support that claim with evidence, which is what this is all about. And he ends with a conclusion. So to us, this is a huge change. And I know for all of us educators that are out there, we went into this profession because we want to help kids, and we want to make a difference. And when I look at Danny's work in September, and then I look at Danny by June, I can't help but think that this program helped Danny make a difference. This is huge. We're very proud of it. I know I'm speaking for my principal and assistant principal, Ms. Aleo, when I say we're very proud of this work. And it's not just the fact that we're helping students write, we're unlocking their thinking, because we know that writing scaffolds thinking. So I want to thank you for giving me this time. The kids say it better than I do. So I'm up here as the teacher, but when you hear it from the students how much this has helped them, you'll really see what a difference this has made. So I couldn't, trust me, I had a class of 34 kids that begged to come on a trip to Texas to come speak to you. Obviously, that couldn't happen financially, so we did the next best thing. We have a little video. So these are our students. This was not scripted, I assure you. We brought some kids into a room. We threw out some general questions. You'll see them on the slide, and you'll get to hear from them themselves what this program has done for them. So if you want to roll the video, and I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
In junior high, my writing wasn't what it should have been. Like, in junior high, I used to start my essays saying, in this essay, I want to talk about this.
Your mind would just be all over the place. You wouldn't know where to start, where to finish.
I was marked dyslexia. It means I couldn't read or write. My whole life, my parents put me through trials and trials to try to figure out how to help me.
This writing program has definitely made me feel more confident in both my writing and my speech. Overall, the way I can express myself is more clear and vivid.
I feel so much smarter. I feel like this writing program enhanced my vocabulary. My grades went up. I feel like I can write essays and not babble and write stuff that's unnecessary.
It helped me figure out how to write and read. I can now write paragraphs and paragraphs of essays and pages.
As teenagers today, if we don't know something, if we don't know how to do something,
just shut down.
Yeah, we're not gonna do it.
This writing program really helped a lot of kids stay active in class.
I didn't think I was going to go to college because I was special ed, and special ed kids don't go to college. I do feel like I'm going to college now because I improved vastly in that.
If we have to write an essay to get into a job, I feel like our essay, because of this writing system, would basically beat out the other person
Put
if
us
they
over the
didn't
top.
if they didn't get this writing system that we received here at New High School.
Without it, you don't have the edge, you don't have the code, the writing code.
And I feel like it's wrong to hog this to ourselves. I feel like we should share this to the world.
Schools need this because it helps kids like me. Kids who are I have seen kids like me, even lower than me, do extremely well.
Well, Tony Ann, we've got about half an hour left, and I think everyone in the audience just wants to hear more from you. Here's to her. Peg, we just heard a teacher speak. What was it that you saw in the work that so moved you?
I think when I first went into the school and I met a student, and she said, I didn't really know how, I knew how to read, but I didn't really know which words were important. And then I studied writing, and then I understood what words were important. And honestly, I felt the little hairs on my arm stand on end, because I was like, wow, that's exactly what the research says. That's exactly what neuroscientists say. That's exactly what 40 years of literacy research says should be happening. That the study of language actually improves reading comprehension, and writing is the way to study language.
Well, we've talked about writing analytically, about making arguments, about gathering evidence. And I have next to me a master of that craft. Bob, if it's okay, I thought maybe, you've written about the country surrounding here, the Hill Country. Could you talk a little bit about what it was like to gather data and do this kind of work and do this kind of writing?
Sure. So I'll talk about when I started doing these books on Lyndon Johnson. I was working in the Johnson Library, where they have, the last time they counted 44 million documents. There's an awful lot of data in there. When I started these books, I thought I didn't really have to do much original research on Lyndon Johnson's youth, because there were already, I think, 17 biographies of him in print. But what I was doing was I would work in the library from 9 to 5 every day, and then at 5 o'clock I'd drive out into the Hill Country. Now, when you walk out of this building, if you look to your right and across, you'll see a low line of hills. There's some buildings blocking them there. Part of it there, but you can still see the first line of hills. Those hills go on for 300 miles. It's the Texas Hill Country. When Lyndon Johnson grew up there, it was one of the most remote and isolated and impoverished areas of the United States. And I would drive out there. Boston hadn't expanded out there then. It was still just as empty as it was when Lyndon Johnson was a boy. And I would try to find the people who grew up with him. He died so young that when I started, all his high school classmates and college classmates and the people who made up his first political machine were still alive. And I tried to interview one every afternoon. And I came back and I said to my wife, Ina, who was working in the library with me, I'm not understanding these people. I'm from New York. They're so different from me that I can't get an eye. I don't understand them. And if I don't understand them, I don't understand Lyndon Johnson. So I said, we're going to have to move out there. And we moved out there and lived there for the better part of 3 years. When you talk about gathering data, when you're on the spot, amazing things happen. People open up and talk to you. The people in the Hill Country there, they had a phrase, because all these reporters had come through one after the other. They would stay 3 days and go back and write a long article in the New York Times about what the Hill Country was really like. When the people of the Hill Country called them portable journalists, and in the terms that we're talking about today, you could say they didn't spend much time collecting the data. When the people there realized that Ina and I had come to stay, suddenly they started to tell me things that they had never told me, that they had never talked about before, because they felt it wasn't, they were very patriotic, and they didn't think it was right to tell these stories about someone who became president of the United States. But you heard these stories about the ruthlessness of Lyndon Johnson when he was young. Then you also heard something else, though. I have a rule: whenever I interview somebody, I don't go to sleep until I've typed that whole interview that day, because I want to have the impressions, what their face looked like when they were talking to me, in my mind. And I realized as I was typing, in interview after interview, there would be some version of the phrase, no matter what Lyndon was like, we loved him because he brought us the lights. Now, I was from New York City, so I knew that bringing the lights meant that when Lyndon Johnson became a congressman at the age of 28, the Hill Country did not have electricity. and he brought electricity to the hill country. But I had no idea what that meant. At the hill country, the wells there, you know, the water level is so low that the wells have to be like 75 feet deep. The rivers, like the Pedernales River, dry up most of the year. So every bucket of water had to be lifted up by these women and taken. Now, the Department of Agriculture tells us that the average farm family uses 73,000 gallons of water a week. That's 2 tons. And all that water had to be lifted by these women. But until you were there and you talked to these women, you couldn't realize what that meant. They would go over to their wells, which they didn't have to use anymore, so the wells were covered with wooden boards. And they would push the boards aside and they would say, "You're a city boy. You don't know how heavy a bucket of water is, do you?" And they take out from their garage a bucket with the rope still attached, and they drop it in, and I would lift it up, and I would see it's heavy. And they would say, "You know, it's too heavy for me. These buckets were too heavy for me to lift." So we would do the following. What they called was walking away with the water. They put the rope over their shoulder and walk away with it, pulling up the bucket each time. And then, because I was there, some of these women started to do something which they had never done before because they were ashamed of it. They had to carry this water back to their homes. So they would do it 2 buckets at a time because that was less trips. And therefore, they would have a yoke like a cattle. And they would go to their garage and they would, I'll never forget the first time, it was one of Lyndon Johnson's cousins, Ava Johnson Cox, brought out her yoke. She was so ashamed of it. I had had many interviews with her. You could call it all gathering data. And she finally took this yoke and showed me how she had, when she was a young girl, had to carry, the young married woman, had to carry the water. And these women would say to me, "You know, I had noticed that they were sort of stooped, more stooped than city women. But they said, you know," Ava said, "do you see how bent I am?" Well, I was bent like this when I was young. I was bent as soon as I started having babies and realized I had to bring the water in every day. I got bent like this from carrying the water. So you say, when you find all these different pieces of data, then what do you do? What is analytical writing? What we're talking about analyzing, analytical writing, what we're talking about is thinking. How do you put this into something that people can see? That's what the hard job of writing is, not just to get, in my opinion, it's hard for me, not just to put down the facts, but to make people see what this life was like. I think I've talked all we have time for right now.
No, take your time, keep going, it's okay. You know, one other thing we've talked about, Bob, when we've talked about your writing is the power of a single example to illuminate something complicated, like the way a single bill moves through Congress. And I found this very interesting when I was talking to Bob about his writing, and maybe very encouraging for thinking about teaching as well. So if you could talk a little bit about that, a single example.
Okay, you want a single example about
and what
Congress?
it illuminates. Yeah,
Sure. Well, I tell you how I think it. I think that that's right, that a single example, if you go deeply enough into something, can show you great truth. So when there's everybody, writing about Congress is very dull. Who reads about the Senate or Congress? You say, what's really going on there? Legislative maneuvering. It's such an intricate, arcane, boring thing. But when you get into it, and you look at it through the eyes of a genius in it, like Lyndon Johnson, all of a sudden, it's not boring anymore. I'll take one example. The first civil rights bill, in April, there's going to be a big conference here. It's the 50th anniversary of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. How did that act get passed? No strong civil rights act had passed the Senate of the Congress of the United States since Reconstruction, 100 years. Lyndon Johnson comes in after Jack Kennedy's assassination. Everyone's saying to Lyndon Johnson, don't touch civil rights. You have to address Congress. Don't push civil rights. The Southerners control it. It's a noble cause, but it's a lost cause. You know what Lyndon Johnson says to his speechwriter? He says, well, what the hell's the presidency for then? And he says, our first priority is civil rights. And he sees what no one else sees. Everyone thinks it's the filibuster that stops civil rights. And in fact, that's what newspapermen write about. The filibuster is in the Senate. The civil rights bill that Jack Kennedy introduced is still in the House. It's not even on the House floor. It's in the House Rules Committee. No bill can come to the House floor for a vote until the Rules Committee sends it there. And the Rules Committee isn't sending it there. It's chaired by a chairman who's at Old Virginia named Judge Smith. He won't even tell people. When Johnson asks him after Kennedy's assassination in early December, what is your schedule for holding hearings on this bill so you can send it to the floor? Judge Smith says, I have no plans. He says, we'll talk about it in January. Everybody else thinks that. No one writes about it. This isn't in the newspaper. No one thinks that this is significant. Lyndon Johnson sees it significant. How do we know what he sees? He calls Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post, and he says, Katharine, you don't understand what's going to happen. He actually called her Kay. He says, Kay, you don't understand what's going to happen. If we allow him to start scheduling hearings in January, the hearings are going to go into February. It's going to get sent to the House floor in March. It's not going to get to the Senate in April. And that's why the filibuster works, because there's not going to be enough time to break it. We have to make him release that bill from the House Rules Committee to the House floor now. And he says there's only one way to do it. It's something called the discharge petition. No president has ever supported a discharge petition. Johnson decides to start it. The New York Times writes, no one understands why, but the civil rights bill started to move yesterday. So I tried to take a whole chapter and talk about getting that bill out of the Rules Committee. That's, well, whether it worked or not, I don't know, but that's what I was trying to do.
For both of you, and maybe Peg, you can start and let your voice rest for a minute. Why do you think we talk about analytical writing as perhaps a key to a broader educational future, as an essential thing to thinking independently? Why do you view
There's a few things
so
going on. I
important?
mean, it's a complicated question. Largely what I see is this is not being done in American schools. So in affluent schools and in elite middle class schools and in nice neighborhoods, parents demand it. But by and large, in American schools, we're not teaching kids how to write. We're not teaching kids how to think, how to take in information, construct their own ideas about it, and then put that out there in a way that is nuanced and precise and clear. And when you see that deficit, when you're in school after school after school and you see that deficit, you wonder, where's the next Robert Caro coming from? Right? You wonder, how are we going to get from where our kids are now to where they need to be? Because surely this is what creates democratic citizens, people who are able to take in information and to think about it and to have an opinion and to express that opinion in a nuanced way. Surely that is one of the shoulder skills we require in this democracy.
Bob, as you think about the importance of this kind of writing to kids thinking for themselves and growing?
I think it's more important than almost anything, because, as I said before, what are we talking about when you talk about analyzing? You're talking about thinking it through. I was so interested to hear that in New York there's so much emphasis on outlines, because what's an outline? An outline is making yourself think through what you're going to write, not just start writing, but think through. I'll tell you something that if you came to my office right now, so I have a wall, it's 26 feet long, and the outline for this 5th volume is that entire wall. And I did that before I started writing. And before I put up that outline, I made myself sit down and think, as I do with every book, can I tell what this book is about in 1 or 2 paragraphs? If I can't do that, I really don't know what the book is about. I make myself think. That's analyze. I think writing, gathering data, and then the step of analyzing it and putting it down on paper is the key, really, to a revolution in American schools. If we could make kids understand that, I think things would change in education in this country.
Is it coincidence that Peg Tyer's article is called The Writing Revolution? I think not.
I didn't know that.
But I thank you for that.
I would say something about great minds, but it's a cliche. I only wanted to ask one last question. When we think about this kind of writing, and we talk about analyzing data and getting the facts clear, but you've said to me, Bob, in private, it must also be literary.
Yeah.
It might also be as good as the best writing we might see in fiction. Why? And Peg, you're welcome to come in on this one too, if you'd like.
You go.
Well, I believe it because when you write something, you want it to last. You know, you feel if you've learned something about how Congress works or something like that, you don't want to just tell it to one generation. You want it to be there for other generations to learn. So you said, what makes something last? So what I did one summer was I said, I think that for nonfiction writing to last, it has to, the prose, the level of the writing has to be at the same level as the writing of fiction writing, of novels that last. And I wanted to see if that was true. So what I did was I took Gibbon, Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, and I took the historical novel that's most like a work of history, in my opinion, War and Peace by Tolstoy, and I would read 2 or 3 chapters of Gibbon and 2 or 3 chapters of Tolstoy, and then 2 and 3 of Gibbon and back, and the level of writing was indeed the same. And I think that's the reason that Gibbon works. So when we say, why should nonfiction writing be literature? What do we mean by literature? That words are exact, that sentences carry you along, that paragraphs are all one idea that ends with a punch, or the punch can be at the beginning of the paragraph. But if you don't have those same things in nonfiction, I don't think we're really achieving what we want to achieve when we talk about teaching kids to write.
It's hard to.
It's so beautifully said.
Yeah.
That's so beautifully said. I agree with that.
Well, I guess I'm going to stand because it's easier, but I have, to conclude our session, I have a couple things to announce. And I was very affected by that. Before I say anything, could we just applaud those words and those ideas?
That was very lovely. It was very lovely.
When Bob said this morning, didn't everyone shiver when he quoted Johnson saying, well, that's what a presidency is for? Let me say to you, this kind of writing, this kind of master art that could unlock so many more kids, that could change trajectories, this is simply put is one of the reasons why the College Board is. Several of my trustees surround me in the audience today. And with their full support, the College Board commits to do everything within its power and the power of our partners to celebrate these delicate details, like but, so, and because. To share these practices, to share the work of these teachers as we have begun with as many teachers in as many schools as we can. And I'd like to say more specifically that we're thrilled to announce a partnership between the College Board and the Atlantic. The Atlantic has a proud history as a home to great fiction and nonfiction for more than 150 years. And we have decided to partner with them to create a set of prizes modeled after the Pulitzer Prize for the best student analytical writing in this country in different categories and publish the best of them. And I'm delighted that we're joined by Steve Clemens today, the Washington editor-at-large. He's been a busy man of late. He is a specialist on the Ukraine. So he spent the last week on television. We're honored that he's joined us today. And you'll hear much more in the months ahead about the College Board's commitment to analytical writing as a force of learning, not just within an English language arts classroom, of course, but within science, within social studies, within the arts. It is one of the most powerful master arts that reverberates throughout all the arts. And on a more personal note, I just wanted to share a couple of stories that brought me here today. This is the first book of Bob Caro's that I read, The Path to Power. I know I should have read The Power Broker first, but I read this book first. And one of the things that brought it to my attention was that Jimmy Wynn said to me that the chapter on the sad irons on that yoke that Bob described was the single best piece of nonfiction he had ever read in his life. Jimmy, if I can dare say, knows what it is to be poor, and so for him to say that has an added depth in my judgment. But for all of you, there are things like that when he talks about, and I'm sure you all felt it, what it means to take a cliche or an idea like poverty and allow a reader to begin to feel it on the tips of their mind and fingers, and then to see the action that responds to it was, for me, unlike anything I'd ever quite experienced, until I read the introduction to the Master of the Senate. And I'm feeling guilty because when I wrote Bob a note inviting him to speak here, I cited the passage on the sad irons, but I didn't give Jimmy Wynn the credit as the person who saw it as the, I just said I thought it was the best piece of nonfiction. And when I told him that the introduction to the Master of the Senate, I have, geekily enough, I have a master's degree in ancient philosophy. And so I have read Plato's Republic more times than most people. And I said, and I find it strangely fearful and relevant at all times. And I said to him that the introduction of the Master of the Senate was the most intensive examination of politics I had seen since reading Plato's Republic. But those were not my words, those were my mother's words, who was teaching a course on the Master of the Senate in Plato's Republic. I just wanted to pause and thank that kind of sharing, that kind of teaching that goes between people. Because, Bob, one reason these things become immortal is because people share them. And that act of sharing and that act of instruction is what Tony Ann Vroom does. If you'd come up to the stage here for a minute. It's what Dina Zaleo does, who's her assistant principal, who's also here today and helps lead the social studies work. Come, please. It's what Deirdre DeAngelis does, who's the principal of that school and who led that change. And if you think there are not people who think with a kind of polite snobbery that this kind of careful practice is beneath them, you are badly wrong. It takes a woman of great intelligence and courage to fight for the most basic and beautiful things. If you only knew the fights they've had, I have some sense of them. And then it takes a journalist to tell their story. And Peg, you know, I hope you're feeling some of the resonance of your work right now. And it takes a writer of the order of Bob Caro to remind us all of the simple, what is there to say, the awesome power of writing with care and reading with care, of reading things worth reading, of discovering things worth seeing and sharing them. And Steve, if you'll come on stage, it does take an executive editor. It does take a publisher.
I was trying to film this.
So you will hear more details in the months ahead. But know that this college board, our trustees, our member colleges are united in the notion that for students to write with care, to write analytically, to gather evidence, is perhaps the single most, or certainly a cardinal part of the preparation for college, for career, for future work. You'll hear more details about a prize for student writing throughout this country because, you know, this is hard work. And it's time to just keep saying to teachers, you ought to do it, and to kids, you ought to do it. It is time to celebrate it. And we will do everything we can with partners here and with a team like this. I think we've got a shot. Thank you so much for your attention.